Welcome, everyone. It's good to have y'all here tonight for this month's professional development seminar. For anyone joining in on the live streams now or watching later on YouTube, welcome. My name is Luis Antonio Pichardo. I'm the founder and executive director of DSTL Arts, DSTL Arts, the nonprofit arts mentorship organization that inspires, teaches, and hires emerging artists from underserved communities. And as usual, I'm accompanied by our lovely master teaching artist, Abraham Jaramillo. Say what's up, Abraham. There he is, rocking the old school 3D glasses look for tonight. Well, as promised, today we're going to be discussing a variety of things related to publishing. More specifically, we're going to be talking about publishing contracts and commissions. And as I go through this slide deck, I'll be talking a little bit more specifically at moments about our, procedures for publishing work through Distill Arts. But this also covers a lot of things that are related to just publishing and contracts in general. So, if you have any questions about any aspect of publishing as it relates to the material presented here, you're obviously welcome to ask away. You can use the chat on whatever platform you are joining in by. And this slide deck will also be made available to you for those of you that are on Zoom now through our Google Classroom. You can download it there and you'll be able to watch the video there as well. So, first things first, before we get going, I want to do a quick little check-in. We've covered a lot of different topics over the course of the last several months, 6 months to be exact, since we've been offering these seminars. And I'm just curious to hear from those of you in the session now. What factors are you currently considering as you plan a career as a working artist that maybe you didn't think of before? Like I said, we've been covering a lot of different topics, and I'm just kind of curious to see, what are things that are on your mind now, in particular, since all of you are nearing the end of your manuscript development journey. So, what you got on your mind, fam? You could use the chat or you could raise your hands. Got a couple folks in the house that have also previously published, so you're welcome to share your thoughts as well. See, Dr. Rosie, you're unmuted. Did you want to share something, Dr. Rosie?
Yeah, I was just thinking, it, the I think going back to, just because even a little bit earlier you had talked about, you know, um, if we either create or if we do have an actual, website to update it. So those kinds of factors are coming to mind, especially if, since this will be the second book that I'm going to be able to publish through Distill Arts. So it's like I feel like now, okay, this is really serious business. so 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 you know the so it's more about thinking about where am I. I do have a website, but I really haven't updated it, and I really need to start considering to do that so that I can start connecting with more folks out there, because I really enjoy going to the LA, book festival, and promoting their books there, but we can also promote it via, our websites and all that. So,
Mhm.
you know, I think that's what's coming to my mind. The for planning for a career, as a working artist, that's what I need to start rethinking and actually now taking the next step.
Right on, right on. Yeah, I'm glad that we were able to, obviously have you produce your first chapbook through our organization. And you've definitely been one of our best advocates when it comes to, not just the grants, but also being out there in the community and selling your work. Your chapbook always sells out when you're around. And
Thank you.
I'm glad that you're thinking about, the importance of having your website and, using it as a platform for marketing your work and everything else. Um, so yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dr. Rosie. Anyone else have any other comment or thing that they'd like to specifically call out? We got Eric here in the chat saying the accounting aspects, a social media strategy, maybe trying to build a community around a book. Yeah. And Navortu, you're thinking of how filing taxes would look like. Yeah. Well, there's some strategies that can obviously help you with that we did cover in our previous session on business planning. Mauricio?
Hey, Luis. Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mauricio, and I have a previously published book. So, I think where I'm at in terms of career and plan is kind of like what's the next steps, kind of taking my book and, further projects, moving on. Specifically for me, like detailed contracts and terms that like offer no sort of like vagueness to it. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And like what's the next step to me? How do I continue the work? How do I expand my knowledge, circle of influence, like, getting possibly into education or, just maybe even traveling, the States for my book. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Nice, nice. Thank you, Mao, for sharing your thoughts. And yeah, I think all of the things that you're saying now are certainly aspects that we'll be covering here, especially when it comes to, yeah, not just the promotion aspects, but also, how to protect your work and how to protect yourself as an artist. Because publishing isn't just, the work going out there into the world and it does its own thing. It's constantly you looking at other ways in which you can ultimately capitalize on it, you know. Um, so yeah, thanks for sharing your thoughts. Any last comment here? And again, if you have any questions or anything as we go, please feel free to use either the chat or to raise your hands. As we like to do, we like to discuss our kind of place in history. And here we have a quote from Ava DuVernay. Many of you might be familiar with the name. She is an American filmmaker and TV producer, as well as a film publicist. And they are quoted as saying, all the traditional models for doing things are collapsing, from music to publishing to film. And it's a wide open door for people who are creative to do what they need to do without having institutions block their art. How many of you would agree with this or have any specific thoughts related to this? Got the thumbs up from Mao. True. All right. Thank you, Erica. Got another person in agreement. All right. Thank you, Carolyn. Abraham.
Well, I guess kind of half agree. I think at the beginning of the internet, all that was kind of the age of like, oh, we can make it by ourselves, but now it has become also a way to like who has the most like access to all these crowds or systems that help you navigate to get more followers or things like that. So it has become kind of the same.
Yeah, I can see where Abraham is coming from as well. When we think about things like promotion and marketing, we discussed social media as a strategy before. And yeah, the, crazy, very hidden algorithms that influence the way in which content gets surfaced, that's kind of a new system that we have to also acknowledge as being in some ways a gatekeeper, right? There's always going to be at some point some kind of system in place that can, uh, to a certain degree, block the performance of art in a particular space. However, on the other side of that, there's a lot of technologies that have had a very positive influence and made art that much more accessible, and the act of making art that much more accessible. Mauricio?
I think I agree with both sentiments of new like traditional models. I think it goes to like where the history is and what sort of models artists had to kind of go through. And I believe especially for writers, like, the traditional, like going through the big four publishing houses has definitely like changed. But I think to Abraham's point, I think now we're starting to see like the new traditional model of maybe self-publishing is now becoming more popular. And people are kind of going that route, but that's also kind of being almost standardized as well.
Hmm.
And to go on your point as well, like even there are even like careers for people that like specialize in marketing on social media. So I think in that sense, it's definitely like moving away from having kind of like that gate kept marketing strategies in these big like four publishing houses or more traditional ways.
Hmm.
And that's kind of almost like democratizing like those skills that used to be exclusive to like bigger companies.
Yeah, I think that that's the best term for it, right? Everything has become a bit more democratized, and we have to understand that sometimes it requires doing, the research that we need to do, or maybe pulling some of the best aspects of like the DIY movement and the best aspects of the traditional movements in art and publishing. And to be honest with you, a lot of those things are going to be on a case by case basis. In some cases, it will be better to work with, say, a publisher. And in some cases, it might be better to work with your own, you know, creative impulses and self publish. And that's kind of what I wanted to cover today to start. Self-publishing versus publishing, they do still exist, right? And let's see, yeah, Carolyn added in the chat. I guess it depends on what your goals are and how you'd like to get there. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm thinking too. The value of working with a publisher, someone that is established, is that you get things such as editorial guidance and copy editing. Really, it comes down to a publisher's kind of image. That's what they're really working to preserve. It's in their best interest to make sure that your work is free of as many typos, errors, and omissions as possible. Publishers also will likely be working with you to license maybe excerpts or quotes that you pull from other people's work that become part of yours. If there's images and other things that are going to be part of your manuscript, they will be the ones that will likely do all of the legal work to make sure that everything is properly attributed in its own way. So in that sense, because of how big a traditional publisher is, they can help you with some of those aspects. But again, it comes down to just their own self interest, right? They're looking out for their image as a publisher first and foremost. Your work may not be the thing that is the real priority in situations like that. There's also design, printing, shipping, and distribution. These are all things that as a larger publisher, they would pull pretty much every resource that they have available, right? They will take full control or near full control of your manuscript once you submit it. You, as the author and artist, will have very little say on how, when, and even where your book will be sold. That's what kind of working with a larger publisher means. Yes, Abraham?
Yeah, we're just having a conversation on Saturday with one of our old mentees. She has a couple of books out and she's working a new one. She was telling me that one of the publishing companies he was working with, she didn't like the changes they were making as well as the cover of the book. And she tried to make them like see her way, but at the end, she's ends up going a different direction. So now she's looking for a different place because
Mhm.
again, you don't have full control when you are publishing with somebody else instead of self-publishing,
Yeah.
which is a benefit and a curse in a way.
Yeah. If you're lucky and you have a publisher that will work with you, that will at least consult with you on your vision, some of these things may not apply, right? But back to Carolyn's point, it kind of depends on what your personal goals are and how you want to get there. Publishers have certain resources available to them. They can do the graphic design, they can do the shipping and distribution, and they will likely be the ones to contract out a printer who can do the printing in bulk. Those are some of the benefits of working with a publisher. Whereas if you were doing it on your own, that could be sometimes a little overwhelming. Also, there's to some degree marketing support. Not all publishers will invest a lot of money in marketing your books, but at the very minimum, they can at least work with large bookstores such as a Barnes and Noble, and they can pay for the placement of the book maybe at the front, in the entrance of the building where people are going to see it the most, at least for a certain amount of time. There's other things that publishers can do to help with marketing, such as putting up billboards or bus benches. Those are sometimes strategies that work in marketing a book. However, they more than likely will not pay for things like book tours or social media ads and direct sales, meaning sales that you do directly from your website. They won't really support that. Those things are usually going to be things that you have to either get a grant to do, such as a book tour, or you, out of your own pocket, would likely be paying for the boosted posts on social media. But that's not to say that publishers can't help in some way with maybe a slightly larger marketing budget than what you could do on your own. But again, depends on your goal, right? Because as a self-publisher, self-publishing gives you a lot of creative control. And if that's what you really want, if you really want to have the full creative control, self-publishing is a legitimate way to get your work out there. And there are more and more organizations and other funders out there that look at self-publishing as a very honest way of putting your work out there in the world. And in some ways, it also helps with protecting your ownership of your intellectual property. Your intellectual property is, in the end, the most important thing that you can maintain control of when it comes to any form of publishing. Self-publishing, of course, allows you to work with graphic designers and illustrators and copy editors that you choose. If it's someone that you trust, if it's someone that you have a very good relationship with, you can work with them directly to do the layout of a book, to do illustrations, to do maybe even a comic book adaptation, right? This could also be ideal if you're doing more of like a designer style artwork or a boutique style printing or a limited edition of a particular work. In these instances, self-publishing can even lead to doing things that are more collectible and potentially could have a higher profit margin. Because the self-publishing side of this means that you sort of build your budget around how much money you want to earn beyond just the initial print run. What's that, Abraham? Yes. Uh, Show me the cover. She showed me the cover a friend did for her, and what a difference between the one the publisher was offering. Yeah, you're talking about our previous mentee versus
Yeah,
yeah.
she showed me the cover that the publisher was offering, and it wasn't bad, but as she said, it wasn't what she was looking for because she was already thinking of the font being legible. Some of the graphics were a little too, like she mentioned, they would look too cheap or too, I don't know. And she knows because she works in bookstores and stuff like that. And the cover that the friend did for her, like, yeah, pretty great.
Yeah, that's again, right? That's one of the benefits of self-publishing. You can work with people that you really trust and who might actually listen better to your vision for your work. All right. Or you could be the one doing it too, in which case you obviously are the best person to establish the vision of your work, right? In the long run, too, there's a potential for higher profits and longer royalties or residual income. Depending on what it is that you're doing, your residual income could be, I don't know, maybe 5, 10 years longer than what the residual income would be from a larger publisher. Um, there's also that kind of like resale sort of environment in which your work could potentially be, selling for more money beyond the first sale. And then that may translate to either more work for you, or it might translate into uh, maybe other adaptations of your work that could lead to other opportunities that maybe go beyond just the printed form if you're talking about specifically literary publishing. There's also more control over distribution if you are the self-publisher. You could do, exclusive vending opportunities with specific bookstores or mom and pop stores or independent bookstores. There is a little bit more of that control when it comes to distribution, which could be in addition to obviously selling through your own personal website, doing direct sales that way, doing direct sales at events like the Festival of Books. There's other ways in which you can get your work distributed into the world beyond just the Ingram Amazon owned distribution network. And then, of course, there's the custom tailored marketing strategies. And these are things that, in some ways, you can do more easily on your own when compared to working with a larger publisher. Since publishers don't usually cover basic marketing expenses, uh, you know, you may even have to do your own press releases anyway and your own advertisements. So even with having a publishing agreement with someone else, you may still have to be responsible for doing a large majority of your marketing. But that also means it's an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to, as I wrote here, create an experience around your product. It could be something that goes beyond just the book itself. It could be a whole virtual reality environment that is centered around maybe a QR code that is embedded in your book. It could be a series of posters that, when compiled together, tell one story, but when taken apart, are individual standalone works of art. Navor. There's a lot of different ways in which you could really produce a work of art that maybe goes beyond people's typical expectations of what a book could be. And that is one of the beautiful things of self-publishing, because you can expand beyond the, we'll say, in the box thinking of what an object of art might be. So, those are some of the pros and cons to publishing and self-publishing. And it's really important to understand, again, intellectual property. And here's a very quick, very generalized, I'll say, definition of both copyright and trademark. And this is really important for all of you to know, even on a basic level. A copyright is something that protects the rights of the creator of a work of art, whether it be a literary work of art, musical, dramatic, and other types of intellectual works, which can include things like video games. It can include illustrations, comics, basically anything that an individual can create that can be copywritten. And what it does is it exclusively protects the rights of the original work and the author. So the author, the creator, keeps the intellectual property rights for their entire life, plus 70 years if it is actually registered through the US Copyright Office. A copyright can also extend to works that are or can be printed, displayed, distributed, or performed in physical or digital media, including the internet. So if you create, for example, a website, an interactive website that is a supplement to a zine that you created, that website can be copywritten. The code of the website can be copywritten. And for the rest of your life, as long as it is in existence, plus 70 years after your death, it will be yours in copyright. Also, it's really important to know that rights, intellectual property rights, can be transferred or sold either permanently or temporarily based on an agreement, based on a contract. So this is very, very important for everyone to be aware of. When somebody says that they copyrighted their work, that's generally what it's going to mean. And the only way to copyright your work in the US is through the US Copyright Office, which is simply copyright.gov. A trademark, sometimes people confuse copyright and trademark. Trademarks are specifically for businesses. This is more of a commercial thing. And a trademark is designed to protect the use of a company's name, their logo, their slogans, and their products. As an example, Coca-Cola is a trademark. It is not a copyright because that is a specific company-owned identity, brand identity. And it's basically designed, the trademark that is, it's designed to protect the interests of the consumer. No one else in the world can go around using the Coca-Cola script to market a soft drink that is a similar soft drink. No one else can. If they do, they infringe on the trademark of Coca-Cola. And part of the reason why those protections are important is because, let's say, somebody decides to do the original recipe for Coca-Cola, cocaine included, and they're out there marketing it as a Coca-Cola, maybe with the same font and script. That could put some people in danger. So the idea behind a trademark is that the Coca-Cola company can sue whoever is using the original recipe that includes the cocaine. They can sue them to ultimately protect the consumer. So again, this one always will, if anything, have the company's, the corporation's best interests in mind, whereas the copyright has the individual artist's best interest in mind. When you're thinking about your work, if you can afford it, I recommend copywriting your work first before you do anything. If you do have a brand that you are creating, you can always trademark your brand with the US Trademark and Patent Office at uspto.gov. So that's the difference between the two. Just remember, copyright protects the individual artist. Now, we're going to take a very brief look at a publishing agreement, specifically the DSTL Arts one. So as you see here on your screen, it might be a little small right now, but this is what the actual publishing agreement looks like that I would be presenting to you if you decide to publish any manuscript through DSTL Arts. Obviously here, there's some basic information about the publisher. You would be responsible for filling in and maintaining current all of the information that you see here, meaning your name, your legal name specifically, mailing address, and if you have a pen name that you use, you would also include that here. This clause, this number one clause right here that's highlighted in yellow, it describes for you how you should be going about preparing your manuscript before delivering it to ultimately me. The basic language here is really about you're not signing your soul away completely. Come on, Abraham. But the way that you're going to be preparing your manuscript to submit it is either, if it's a written document, like say poetry, short stories, novels, etc., it would be as a Microsoft Word file or a Google Doc file. If it includes images like drawings, paintings, photography, at minimum, the images need to be 300 ppi so that they can reproduce in a book in print in a fair resolution. So yeah, 300 ppi. That's the minimum resolution, and they should be in JPEG format. If it's a combination of words and images, then the words obviously would need to be typed up also in a .doc file or Google file with the names of the images in line with the text so that it's easy to know where the images go. In the case of things like comics, where say you have speech bubbles that need to be filled in, then you should provide a script as well as the illustrated panels. And if you have questions about this, obviously we'll go through this a little bit more when you are prepared to submit your files for publication. But that's going to be one of the main things that you should be looking for in a publishing agreement if you are ever presented with one. How do you actually submit your manuscript to the publisher or the designer for design? There should also be something within the publishing agreement, like you see here in clause number 2, that discusses how long the rights for the intellectual property will stay with the publisher. Most publishers, if they are doing things in the correct manner, will have some sort of language that says something about how those rights, those intellectual property rights that you own as the creator, will be used by them. So, in the case of DSTL Arts, under clause number 2, you're granting the publisher, DSTL Arts, exclusive rights to print, publish, distribute, sell, and license the rights to any and all editions and/or formats of the book, in whole or in part, in the original manuscript's written language throughout the world. All of that basically is saying that you are giving DSTL Arts the rights to publish the work and to sell it all around the world in its original language, um, in whatever format is necessary for the publication of your book. You also, under subsection 2.1, are granting these rights to DSTL Arts for a period of 3 years from the date of this agreement. So this is a 3-year agreement. For 3 years, DSTL Arts will have your book in print, and for those same 3 years, it will be distributed as it was delivered. Uh, Obviously reformatted in whatever book format is best for the book. Permissions of use under 2.2 beyond these covered by fair use and copyright laws and this agreement shall be at the sole discretion of the author and artist, who alone may grant release and permissions. So ultimately what this is saying is that you as the artist have the final say as to how your work is used. Ultimately, what DSTL Arts aims to do with our publishing agreement is to give you the ability to control who, what, where, and when your work gets published and in what form it gets published or shared. There are certain fair use and copyright laws that kind of allow other people to either, make references to your work or maybe do remixes of your work, depending on how that is developed. But for the most part, you are the one that has control over your work. These are really important things to look for in any publishing agreement. Again, you as the individual artist should, in every way as possible, have the control over your work, over your intellectual property. It is yours. No one else should be allowed to take it away from you in any capacity. There's obviously a lot of other things here, like in the case of this one, where it talks about, you haven't, infringed upon another person's rights to their privacy, to their own intellectual property. Those kinds of clauses are designed to protect you and the publisher from getting sued in the future by people who can make claims to other, intellectual properties that may be, used within the work. And there's also here this clause in the DSTL Arts one, at least, that talks about you will have approval over the design, the format, and the style of the book. including the text, graphic material, and cover art. So, we work with you to develop how your book looks when we publish it. It's not just I take the manuscript and that's it. You never hear from me ever again. It's quite the opposite. I work with you. I send you a couple of versions of it. You get to see it as it's coming along. And if we want to make changes, we're able to make those changes before it gets sent to print. And then again, here, that just reinforces that. Once you approve the final art, then it will get sent to print. Once it's sent to print, unfortunately, there are no additional changes that can be made. So, we want to be sure that 100% of the book is up to your vision and your specs in your mind, based on what we're able to do, right? Based on what's feasible. Also, you're responsible for making sure that there are no spelling mistakes, grammar, all that. I'll do my best to do all the copy editing with you, but it is a team effort. So, keep that in mind. Does anyone have any questions so far about this publishing agreement? Yes, Mauricio?
So, could you go back a page,
Sure.
I guess, to the one where there's terms? Like, okay, yeah. So on 2.1,
Mhm.
I guess my hypothetical question would be, what if a contract doesn't really have terms for a specific period of time like yours does? How would one interpret that? Do you think that's an indefinite like date?
That it kind of does become an indefinite thing, and that's where um, you would really want to look at the rest of the publishing agreement to see
Mhm.
if there's any kind of escape clause.
Got
Escape
it.
clauses are what would allow you to put an end to the book being in print and to the book being available for purchase through retail sources. And at that point, you can also say that you no longer want the book to be in print with that specific publisher. Um, One thing that you also want to know is that if you have a publishing agreement that has been fulfilled by the other party, the publisher, and they have put it out in the world, that version of the book is technically theirs. The publisher can say that they have potentially copywritten the work and that that specific edition can no longer be reproduced. So if you are, using your escape clause to say, okay, I no longer want it to be printed by you, we're, moving in our own separate directions now. That means that that version that you gave them can no longer be uh, printed by another publisher. But you can go in, you can make small modifications if you want. You can make some adjustments to the story or to the poetry collection. You can reorder the poems, and it can be reprinted, however, as a new edition. And that new edition honestly would benefit from having new work associated with it. That way, it's in its own way a completely new version of the original manuscript, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Read the small print and send a lawyer. Yeah, exactly, Abraham and Carolyn. And yeah, the object itself, but you can print other versions, right? So, the original book version that no longer can be made in that same way and now needs to be a new updated version. Nabor?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to ask this correctly or as clear as I would like, but um, I wanted to ask, like, if any of us, for example, from the A team, like, if I wanted to use one of the assets I created, whether it be like, let me, I don't know, let me think of something. Yeah, one of the assets I created on and a print like Rizzo printed copies, or if like Carolyn, for example, wants to print one of the photos for a shirt, a series of shirts, or Julie wants like to print like one poem um, on poster papers. Is that within like our, I guess, copyright to, or our agreement to do that, or is that restricted because it's within the 3-year agreement of the date. If that makes sense.
I'm
Mhm.
very happy that you asked that question because that actually brings me to this page. Um, sorry, wait a minute. Is it this page? Yeah, it's this page. So this page of our specific publishing agreement through Distill Arts, again, this is going to be different from publisher to publisher, but um, here, not only do we discuss how the royalty payments work under Section 6 and how taxes would work under Section 7, here under Section 9, you'll see that all rights to the book not expressly granted to the publisher here will remain always with the author and artist. So essentially, you can sell the TV rights, the film rights, and merchandising rights all without the approval of Distill Arts. Distill Arts only has the right described in Section 2, which is the right to the book, to the original book that is produced through the program. So if you want to, say, pull an excerpt of your manuscript, or you want to do a series of resale prints, you can do so without our permission. That's your work. You are always the copyright holder and the owner of your intellectual property under our publishing agreement. And honestly, if you don't have something like that in your publishing agreement with any other publisher that approaches you, you should advocate for that. Ask those questions. Ask if it's okay for you to use portions of your manuscript to either adapt it for use as maybe a script for a film or a TV show, a TV series. If it's going to be adapted into, say, a video game, those are all other ways in which you can monetize the writing that you are creating. If it's posters, if it's uh, tote bags that you're creating, like in our case, you can do that wholeheartedly. I endorse it. And again, most publishers hopefully will have something similar to that. And if they don't, advocate for it. Abraham?
Just a reminder, because some of you might use other people's work, and you should have an agreement signed with the other artist or person that you got the work from. And remember, this is just for DSTL Arts deal. But if you're gonna reprint or do something else with that art, you have to change that to this new different thing that you're doing.
Mhm.
So remember, each project has its own paperwork.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we're more than happy to help you with figuring out some of those things. I mean, that's ultimately one of the benefits of being in our program is that even if you publish with us or without us, you are always welcome to come ask those questions, get some guidance from us. I can't honestly say that, I'm a lawyer and that I understand intellectual property law in its entirety, but I understand enough to be able to say, okay, I think this may require you to speak to a lawyer. Ultimately, do have at least some kind of form of legal representation available to you. There is, of course, public counsel. You can always take advantage of those services that they provide as a nonprofit legal resource. I can be maybe a I don't know what do they call it, a character witness on your behalf, in court. So I can be maybe up to that extent. I can't say that I'll represent you, now, but it is, it's part of my personal vision for Distill Arts to be that for you, right? I want to be a resource that can help you navigate some of these difficult conversations that you sometimes have to have, but always with the intention of protecting your art. Protect yourself as an artist. Don't let yourself be taken advantage of by other people. And yeah, that more or less covers the entirety of the main things that you need to see in a publishing agreement. There are some other things here in the Distill Arts one that I do recommend that you read before you sign any agreement, even the one that I have for Distill Arts. We do have a template to answer Eric's question in the chat of how to work with other artists. And that's actually something that I'm going to discuss next. But before I do, does anyone have any questions, any final questions about publishing agreements? And again, you have access
Um,
to this, so you'll be able to read this later.
I know that the last time, Luis, you had provided us, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, but you had provided us like a form. So if we wanted to use an outside editor,
Mhm.
that you have that, and that helped me a lot last time. So can you send that to us?
Yeah, yeah. It's actually part of this slide deck. So moving on then, since it sounds like that's a question that people have, here we have something that your um, ¿cómo se llama? We have this little table here that discusses licensing terms and agreements and the difference between licensing work and the work for hire contract, right? Those are the main two that you will be dealing with. Licensing, when it comes to licensing something, it's really about controlling the how, the when, the where, and for how long other people can use your artwork. You, again, own the copyright to your work. Doesn't matter if it's registered or not. As the author, you are the person that owns the intellectual property. And if you're working with a publisher, the publisher will own the copyright to any work that they create. Right? So the publisher will own the individual object that is a book that they produce, but you own the content that comprises the interior of the book, right? The licensing establishes for how long, where it will be presented, and when it will be presented. It's also really useful to see in a licensing agreement the use limits, the payment terms, and any kind of escape clause. Those are things that should be on any legitimate licensing agreement. If it doesn't include those things and you sign it, it can get kind of sticky. The situation could be a problem, but in any case, there's always going to be some sort of way for you to advocate for your work and future versions of it. Work for hire contracts are what we will be discussing next when it comes to working with someone else, but they're usually for short-term commercial work that you're asking someone to complete for you. It's usually at will, so you can typically hire and fire someone if you're using a work for hire contract. And any intellectual property rights that are the result of a work for hire contract usually belong to either the hiring company or the individual. So if you are hiring someone to create cover art for you, you are the person that is essentially buying the rights for the artwork. And the author, the creator of that, will have, if you're a good person, limited use of that new piece of art that they are creating for you. Um, you know, as a good practice, if you're hiring someone, obviously use a work for hire agreement that at least gives them the ability to use the work as part of their portfolio. The same goes for you. If you're being hired by someone to create cover art or to create some sort of element that is going to be used in their book, at the bare minimum, again, advocate for yourself and request that you have the ability to use that work as part of your portfolio. The other things that you might hear get thrown around include Creative Commons or open source. Those are very specific to other scenarios. Creative Commons is more about remixing work that is on the internet or in other digital mediums. That does allow you, if you register it through the creativecommons.org website, it allows you to, kind of limit to what degree people can remix or repost or share work that is yours. But I definitely recommend that if you're working in a digital medium, that you be aware of what Creative Commons are and protect your work in that way. Open source is specific to code, source code, either for websites or for programs. So that's a whole other thing. It's not really up the Distill Arts alley, but you might hear that used in some art contexts. So just be aware of the definition of it. And again, licensing versus selling your rights is very important. In general, you never want to sell your rights, just license them. And these are some of those scenarios that I mentioned earlier about how you can license your work. It can be, adapted to a film, a TV series. It can be even turned into music, or audiobooks. Those are two separate licenses. Audiobooks versus a printed book. They're two separate licensing scenarios. You can also talk about print media and even toys and merch. You can create pretty much anything with your artwork if you license it. Again, never sell your work. Always try to work out an agreement where you are maintaining control over your intellectual property. Merch. Yeah, exactly, Abraham. If you need to create a work for hire contract, especially as part of your particular manuscript, remember to include things like payment terms. How are you going to pay the person? Is it going to be one lump sum, or is it going to be done in split payments? And are you going to do it by check? Are you going to do it by cash? Are you going to do it by card? In general, you should have the artist invoicing you so that they become the ones that are responsible for paying taxes on that. If they invoice you, that means that they are the ones that are responsible for the taxes, for collecting, whatever, or setting aside whatever amount they need to pay to the IRS. Yeah, never pay people with exposure. That's actually, I think, very, very, ¿cómo se llama? Very disrespectful. Um, Also, if you do end up doing what's called a short-term hire, if you contract someone, you will have to file a Form 1099 if you pay them more than $600 within the calendar year. So keep that in mind. If you are hiring them as part of your business practice as a contracted artist, you will need to, at least at minimum, file the Form 1099 if they're not an employee. That can get a little tricky. And again, that's why it's really useful to establish those payment terms and how they should be either invoicing you or how you are going to determine when you will give them payment, and the manner in which you're hiring them. Then there's
But
also,
Luis, I'm sorry, Luis. If it's less than 600,
yeah,
the amount you quoted,
yeah,
then you don't have to do that 1099, correct?
correct. Yeah. Although, to be entirely honest with you, it's very useful for them to do it no matter how much you pay them, because a 1099 ultimately acts as a proof of income. And if they are not only working with you, but working with other people, they can then show that as part of their income, and they could potentially qualify for other benefits. They could potentially, um, I don't know, be responsible for taxes. And if that wasn't properly reported, they could be audited in the future. Like there's other complications. So in general, it's good to file the Form 1099, even if you do pay them less than $600 within the calendar year. Um, but you do have to, by law, uh, file a Form 1099 if you pay them $600 or more within the calendar year. So it's just something to be aware of. You will be taxed more. Yes, Abraham. And then Eric asked, quick question back to the licensing. Is it a good practice to have licensing and Creative Commons licensing? Creative Commons licensing is specifically for digital work. So, for digital copywriting or licensing, there I would say yes, it's good to have it if you're talking about things like photography, if you're looking at virtual reality environments or virtual assets for virtual reality, 3D printed schematics or whatever, like those kinds of digital things. Yes, I would say definitely invest in the registration of a Creative Commons copyright if it's going to live on the internet, especially. Licensing is a bit more broad and would be more relevant to other uses that go beyond just the digital realm. This would be for the other things like we have here, right? the film and TV, sound, digital media, print media, and toys and merch. So those are kind of the differences between general licensing and Creative Commons licensing. I hope that answers your question, Eric. So back to the work for hire contract, there's also the use terms. So just like Navor's question before about the Distill Arts publishing agreement, your use terms dictate how people can use the work beyond just, the commission itself. So you in your work for hire contract should be specific about how and under what circumstances the artwork will be used by you and how the other person can use the artwork if you're a good, equitable artist. Um, think about how they could potentially use it for their own professional use. Obviously, you want to limit, their ability to do things like creating prints or posters of the work that they create for you. If you're going to be doing that, you don't want to have that competition between them and you, and for the use of the artwork. But as a working artist yourself, be considerate of how other people might use the work too. So at minimum, allow them to do portfolio based versions or website versions or even social media posts. That's I think always a very equitable way of supporting other artists while supporting yourself as well. Yeah, we would only use it for print, but also for promotion. And then, of course, you can use your artwork for promotion as well. It's going to be really valuable to do so. And in that way, we're supporting one another. We're saying, hey, check out Luis Blacayer at cartoon_distortion, who did the cover art for Art Block Zine Volume 9. It's an amazing piece of artwork, and you can also buy the original print from him. So like those are ways in which you can share in the wealth that is the artwork that is produced. There's also, the opportunity to talk about the design specifications and delivery, right? So in any work for a hire contract, it is good to be very specific about the formatting. That's why in our publishing agreement, we talk about, Google Doc versions and Word doc versions, plus, how you should be delivering the visual art, right? Those kinds of things are very, very important, especially if you're talking about print. Print can be tricky if it's not properly formatted. It's also very important to be clear about whether or not you would accept the work either as digital art or physical art. Sometimes there are requirements based on the needs of the publication. So that's something that you can specify in any work for hire contract. And to help you, as Dr. Rosie so eloquently asked, there is a sample work for hire contract included in this slide deck. So I did upload it earlier, and this will also be available for you to download off of Google Classroom. So you can always use these as samples as you create your own work for hire contract. It's pretty straightforward of where you would want to make changes, right? Insert name here, insert artist name there, et cetera, et cetera. Here under this section, I did provide you with manuscript submission specs when we were talking about the publishing agreement, but at the very, very end of this slide deck, there's also a page that has all of those specs written out in a separate single page. So
Thank you so much. Thank you.
you're welcome. And if you're working with someone who prefers to have their contracts in Spanish, I have also had a chance to translate it. So this is the translated version in Spanish for anyone working with Spanish speakers. All right. So any questions there about work for hire contracts? And remember, again, this is if you're going to ask someone else to add artwork to your manuscript. So if you want someone else to do the cover art, if you don't want me to be involved in that, this is something that you would need to consider using. If you're also going to be asking another person to do copy editing, if you're going to ask them to uh, if you're going to pay them to write a blurb for you or do a review for you, that will be included in print in the book itself. You should also cover yourself and have something similar to this. And oh yes, Navor.
Yeah, I'm not sure where this would fall under, but if, for example, like I wanted to feature my nibblings like artwork, they're like a youth under 18. What would that contract look like with them or my brother,
Yeah,
the parents?
that's an excellent question. Of course, anytime that you involve a minor, anyone who is under the basically age of 18 in the majority of states, then yeah, you would need to have their guardian, parent or guardian, be the ones who enter into the agreement with you. And you should be very specific in the language of your contract, how it's going to work with the artist and their guardian. I would also go even a little step further and say that, like, let's say you decide that you want to share your royalties with them, that you would either create a trust for the minor where you would be, putting whatever royalty amount that you anticipate paying into that trust. And when they become legal age, they can then access it. That's one way to ensure that the money goes to the artist if they are a minor, as opposed to being, maybe used by the parent and never benefiting the minor.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for that piece too.
Yeah. We also have a question from Carolyn in the chat. What if it's more like a contribution to my book? Yes, we're kind of talking about the Britney Spears thing there, Abraham. So if it's more like a contribution to the book, any form of contribution that is a unique piece of artwork that is being presented within the book or any other document that is going to be published. This could include things like video games, audio, etc. Basically, you want to be sure that you are giving credit either within the book itself, that kind of thing, while at the same time also having some kind of agreement with the individual doing the contribution that says whether or not they're going to be compensated for it. If it is something that you anticipate compensating them for, even if it is something like a review or a blurb that describes the book in their language, if there is going to be an exchange of money at any point, or if it's not, and there is a clear understanding that no money will be exchanged, you should still put that into writing because you really want to protect yourself. And I can tell you that me, as your publisher, also would want that added protection of a person potentially changing their mind. You never know. Things might change if your book suddenly becomes extremely popular and we start selling in the thousands, right? And you start making serious money off of it, right? People change when they see money, and if they feel slighted by that, you ultimately, will be responsible for it if you did not have some sort of written and signed agreement between you and the other individual. Um, so yeah, I hope that answers your question, Carolyn.
Well, I guess it's not like a work for hire contract. Would it just more or less be, oh, because it's my mom who's contributing something that she wrote specific to the theme of my book. So we've had like our email exchanges in regards to it, but should I put it in writing? Like, oh, my mom is, I'm obviously going to credit her, and I told her that.
Yeah.
But just something in writing.
Yeah, I would still put that in writing. And part of the reason why you want to still put this in writing is because remember, all the content within the manuscript that you create, at least the majority of it, is your intellectual property. And because it is your intellectual property, and even if you go that extra step of registering it with the Copyright Office, that is something that you could potentially pass on to someone else. And if that person, like in this case, if your mom, feels like you're passing on some element of her intellectual property as the writer of that contribution in a way that either limits her ability to make a profit off of it in the future or that maybe misrepresents them, that could lead to other legal things that you ultimately want to avoid. So the best way to avoid any kind of issues, doesn't matter how close you are, how much you can, trust in the kindness of people, ultimately, if it's in writing and if it's signed and dated, then that's going to be the best protection and the best way to have whatever, agreements you come to be established as law, quote unquote. Does that help?
Yes,
Okay. Yeah,
thank you.
for sure. And like Abraham says, right? Just make it 100% sure. Like you can't go back on it if you sign something, especially if there's money involved. So these are sometimes difficult conversations to have. I will tell you that. But in the end, you're gonna have a better relationship for it, I think. Regarding the copywriting thing, is that something done before book publication? It can be done before and it also can be done after. To answer Eric's question, you can copyright a book, like the manuscript itself, you can copyright it. And like I said before, the book as an object, which is printed and produced by the publisher, that can also be copywritten. That copyright would be held by an organization or a business, whereas the manuscript, the content of the book itself, that's something that you as the author hold the copyright for. They are two distinct objects and two distinct intellectual properties. A person can't take the Distill Arts design files, for example, and try to pass them off as their own because Distill Arts holds the copyright for that design file and no one else can reproduce it by law as according to our publishing agreement. But on the other hand, you as the author can take your same manuscript. um, I mean, it would be a violation of our publishing agreement, but you could technically turn around and reproduce it if it's a different version, like a re-edited version of it, because you always hold that copyright. Yeah, ultimately think of them as two separate things, and it's always going to be your intellectual property, regardless. So you could take poems from maybe one manuscript and poems from another manuscript, because each individual poem is its own intellectual property, and they can all be, remixed and reformatted in their own way and reproduced in another manner. That's why, if you go into a bookstore, you could find the same book, but printed multiple times in multiple different formats in multiple different ways. Yeah, I'm trying my best to not make it go too far over people's heads, but again, if you have these kinds of questions, I'm more than happy to answer them for you. Um, and yeah, exactly, Mao. It's time for a new cover. But yeah, I'm available as a resource for you. We can really have a more thorough conversation about this when your book is ready to be produced. So a couple more things to go over quickly before we call it a night. Sometimes you might find yourself needing people to support you. And so that's where things like agents and unions can really come to your help, to your aid. Both agents and unions can provide you different types of services that ultimately help you protect and license your artwork. That's really why you would want both an agent and a union backing you. Agents, can provide talent representation, which basically means that they are there to sell your skills, talent, or art on your behalf. That's really the function of an agent, is to promote your work out there in the larger world. A union, however, if you are part of a union, they will help you with things like networking and employment opportunities, especially ones that help ensure equitable pay. That is the primary purpose of a union if you are part of a union. So think of it as more for gigs. This is more for your individual work to be kind of promoted out there with some effort on your behalf, maybe minimal effort on your behalf.
Luis?
Also,
Oh,
yes.
sorry.
No, yeah, go ahead,
Luis,
Mrs.
where would the Writers Guild come under? Unions?
A union.
No.
Yeah, that's a union.
Union?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll
Okay.
actually go over them real quickly in a moment here. But yes, unions are useful if you're very active in certain areas such as film, TV, writing, and you're doing it for multiple entities, we'll say. Um, an agent is more about just you as the individual and getting your individual work put out there into the world. Ultimately, the agent's incentive is to make sure that you get the highest paying deal you can get. Most agents charge between a 10 and 15% commission. That's very, very important for you to know. If an agent is charging you more than 10 to 15%, they're probably not working under ethical practices. So you
Huh.
be very aware of that. Most agents average anywhere between 10 to 15% commission, not like a monthly or annual due that you pay them. So it's really in their best interest to get you gigs because their commission is going to be dependent on that. That's how they can help you with navigating contracts. Unions, if you're part of a union, they can actually help you review contracts too, in a very similar way as an agent. But a union does not have any kind of like commission that they would be pulling from your contracts. They're really there to ensure that you are getting, protected coverages under whatever your work for hire contract is. So that's the primary difference when it comes to being part of a union versus having an agent. Again, an agent, their incentive is to get you paid the highest amount that you can get paid so that they get paid. Whereas a union, it's in their interest to make sure that you get paid an equitable amount that also provides you protections as an artist. And their purpose for doing that is to protect you and their other union members. Also, both of them can help you with finding attorneys. Agents themselves are not attorneys. They cannot give you any kind of legal advice. Only a certified attorney can. Unions almost always have attorneys on retainer. So if you are a member of a union, you can usually gain access to an attorney who can help you with either litigating breaches of contract or even just checking on contracts to make sure that they are legitimate and that they are, in fact, protecting you as an artist. And then there's also the idea of a specialist, right? Agents usually work to get you the gigs, but they will refer you to a specialist to help you develop either your public image or your brand. They sometimes could act as an editor, but usually they're going to defer to specialists for marketing and design and all of those things. Unions can also sometimes refer you to specialists in other support areas, but a union typically will not have direct access to individuals that they have vetted. They might have like a resource list of other specialists in some of these areas, like marketing and design, but they're not going to say like this is the person to go to. If you're looking for an agent, again, remember the Industry standard is 10 to 15% for a commission. And it's also really useful when you're selecting an agent to think about who else are they representing. There's a benefit to them representing people who create work that's similar to yours. If your work is similar to, say, a Sandra Cisneros, then maybe the Cisneros agent might be the right person for you because at least they understand where you're coming from with your style, with your artwork. Also, it's good to know what type of properties they've sold and to whom, right? If they have the right connections to get your work out there or work that is similar to yours out there, that might also mean that they're well connected in the areas that you're hoping that they are. So an agent, will sometimes help you, sometimes, not be the right fit, either because of personality or just their network, right? It's also very, very important to understand the contractual obligations and financial obligations that you're agreeing to. Again, not all agents are the same, and not all of them are going to be trustworthy. So, look for people that charge a commission. Again, industry standard is 10 to 15%. Agents shouldn't be charging you a direct fee. Their fees are usually deducted after the contracts go through, right? So again, their main incentive is to get you the right deal so that their commission is bigger. But if they're charging you and they're not even getting you gigs, then that is not an ethical agent. Also, it is not ethical to require exclusivity contracts that limit how you can use your work. Um, Kind of going back again to the point that we were talking about with Navor, if an agent is saying in their contract with you that only they can manage the rights, the intellectual property rights agreements for you on your behalf under any kind of media, that's going to limit your ability to, make deals with, like, say, movie producers or directors or, video game firms, like whatever the case might be. You want to be able to have the ability to work with multiple agents because no one single agent is going to have the right amount of connections within any given industry to be able to work outside of that specific industry, if that makes sense. So, just be aware if you're going to go down that route, that some agents do not always have your best interests in mind. If you want to learn more about how literary agents work, and if you want to find one, I recommend checking out the Poets and Writers website, which is pw.org. These links here are active, so when you download the PDF, you can click on them and you can actually go to these websites. It's also important to be aware that the majority of literary agents won't represent poets. If all you're doing is writing poetry, unfortunately, it's the type of book that sells the least. So most agents will not represent a poet. But if you're doing poetry in addition to doing, say, a memoir or comics or other forms of prose-based writing, then you can find an agent. Um, yeah, Rupi Kaur, I probably has done other forms of writing. I can almost guarantee you that they got their start doing something else and then pivoted to poetry. A lot of times that's what most poets do. They will look for an agent who will publish something like a memoir or who will publish maybe a collection of short stories, help you get that published, and then the poet will come out, right? Then they will try to publish their full length poetry books, and at that point, because the agent has seen that there is already a market for their work, then they might continue working with you. But usually if you're starting off only doing poetry, the majority of agents will not represent you. There, I'm sure, exist exceptions to that rule, but just be aware you're going to have a much harder time finding an agent if you're only doing poetry and if you're only trying to get a book of poetry produced. That's not necessarily the case if you're, say, a photographer, if you are, again, a short story writer or a novelist, if you're writing memoirs or creative nonfiction or other forms of prose, biographical, true crime, whatever the case might be, you're probably going to have an easier time finding an agent. And, it's a very unfortunate thing, but that is the state of the world. So I won't go too much into the union stuff, but there's member benefits. There are also eligibility requirements to be aware of, plus, membership dues. If you are familiar with how unions are structured, those are some of the basic things that you need to know about joining a union. A couple of good unions that we have found in our very limited research include the National Writers Union, which does accept work for hire and contract writers, as well as writers who are doing predominantly digital work. And their monthly dues are based off of your income, your annual writing income. So if you make as low as, I think it's $5,000 in a year, you can start off at as low as $1,250 a month as a member, I forget what they call it, but they do offer things like medical, dental, and vision insurance help, press passes, and other certain things that are really beneficial if you're especially a journalist or a blogger. But they are also good for freelance and self-employed poets, writers, etc. And yes, that does include, like I said, poets. They actually do accept poets who decide to join the union. The other one to consider is the Authors Guild. They are looking more for traditionally published authors and illustrators, and they do also accept freelance writers and also emerging writers. So if you haven't published anything yet, you actually can still join this union for $100 a year or $9 a month, depending on how you want to break it down. Very similar as the other one. But this one again, if you don't earn a certain amount of money per year, then your eligibility is limited. But again, this one is nice because they actually do have a emerging writers membership for unpublished writers. So it's a good entry point if you're thinking about joining a union as a writer. There's also things like membership and trade organizations. These are slightly different. These are more going to benefit you through advocacy, networking, and other forms of resource sharing. So, some examples include the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the people that put on the Oscars. They would be considered a membership or a trade organization. Then there's also the Academy of American Poets. They are, in fact, a nonprofit organization that puts together the National Poetry Month. They offer a bunch of other resources for teaching artists and other writers and poets that are sometimes beneficial, sometimes, more for the general public to gain a better appreciation for poetry. And then locally, I definitely recommend supporting Arts for LA. Arts for LA is an LA-based advocacy group that really focuses a lot on supporting the arts nonprofit sector, as well as individual artists and arts education programs within LA. But they do advocacy both at the local and national level. So um, they're a good organization. I stand by them. They get my cosign. Ultimately, regardless of whether you decide to join a union or have an agent or even joining a trade organization, really keep within your circle like-minded artists, people with whom you feel comfortable sharing your ideas, your resources, and more. DSTL Arts is always going to be here for you, arts fam. We will have your back regardless of whether or not you're active 100% of the time or, sometimes within our programs. As long as I'm around and as long as I'm able to, I'm more than happy to provide you with whatever insights I have. I've been doing this for long enough to feel not like an expert specifically, but at least aware enough to be able to guide you in a direction that hopefully benefits you. In the meantime, for those of you in the mentorship program, as our homework, I recommend that you review and to the best of your ability, try to understand some of the contracts and publishing agreement that are included in this particular packet. This is going to be very similar, if not exactly the same as the publishing agreements and work for hire contracts that you will likely be using, not just for your manuscripts now, but in the future. And again, always advocate for yourself. Be aware that your intellectual property is valuable. Never sell your rights right away. License it. And if it doesn't include language that allows you to benefit off of your artwork, question it. Always be critical of any kind of contracts that you receive from any source. Yeah, use that noggin, as Abraham is saying. So with that, I will, say goodnight to those of you on our live streams. Again, if you have any questions, you can always learn more about our programs at distillarts.org. You can obviously follow us on all the socials using at DSTL Arts. And if you have any questions, you can reach out directly to me, Abraham, or Angie. Our email addresses are on the screen now. For the YouTube stuff, obviously, remember to like and subscribe and do all that jazz. And again, for those of you in the mentorship program, this very last page is a call out of the specifications for preparing your manuscript. So this is the very, very last page of the slide deck. Again, it will be available to download. It is actually available to download now on Google Classroom. So be sure that you follow this when you are preparing the final version of your manuscript that you will be turning into me. Or even if you're, thinking of turning it in to another publisher and you want to explore publishing with someone else. These are going to be some very useful tips for preparing your work. And this is specifically how to prepare your work for Distill Arts publication. So thanks again, everyone. I appreciate all of you reaching the finish line with me. I'm very happy to have each one of you in the program. I'm really excited to see all of the work that is being produced. And I really wish you all a great rest of your week. I'll see y'all soon.